The hall is thick with smoke from burning torches. Wooden benches creak under the weight of villagers, each jostling for a view. At the center stands a woman, barefoot, shivering, her hair hacked away. She is not armed with spells or cauldrons. She is armed with nothing but fear. Before her, a priest in heavy robes raises a parchment, his voice booming as he names her crime. Witchcraft. The crowd gasps. Children whisper, men smirk. But no one asks for proof. Her humiliation is proof.
Enough.
This was not justice. This was theater. A ritual where shame mattered more than evidence, where public humiliation was punishment long before the verdict. Her trembling, her silence, her stripped body, all part of a performance designed to terrify every woman watching. Why did medieval societies invent trials that humiliated women more than they punished crime? Why was shame itself weaponized, transforming accusation into entertainment? In this journey, we uncover the ordeals that stripped women bare, the rituals that turned trials into spectacles, and the myths that made humiliation as deadly as fire. Because the witch trial was never about magic, it was about control, and humiliation was its sharpest blade. To understand the humiliating trials that scarred medieval Europe, we must first ask, why witches? Why were thousands of women singled out, stripped of dignity, and branded as servants of the devil? The answer lies not in magic, but in fear. Religious fear, social fear, and the fear of women who did not conform. For medieval Europe, the foundation was biblical. Eve's transgression in the Garden of Eden haunted every woman who followed. Church leaders preached that women were spiritually weak, morally unstable, and dangerously tied to the flesh. If men represented order, women represented temptation. Priests warned that Satan sought women first, whispering his bargains into their ears, tempting them into secret pacts. This theology gave rise to laws. Early church decrees like the Canon Episcopi warned against women who ride with Diana in the night and dismissed them as delusions. But as fear grew, disbelief hardened into certainty. By the 15th century, texts like the Malleus Maleficarum no longer dismissed witchcraft as fantasy. They declared it real, deadly, and rooted in female nature. The infamous manual described women as feeble in body, fickle in faith, claiming they were more easily seduced by the devil. It became not just dogma but a handbook for persecution. Religion alone could not have produced the frenzy of accusations. Social fear fed the fire. Medieval life was precarious. Famine, plague, storms, or stillbirth could strike without warning. Without science, people searched for someone to blame, and women became the perfect scapegoats. A cow fell sick, perhaps the widow next door cursed it. A child died in the night, perhaps the old woman who lived alone whispered to demons. Witches explained the inexplicable, giving villagers an enemy they could see and punish. Gossip fueled accusations. A neighbor slighted, a family feud, or a rejected suitor could twist into whispered suspicions. Jealousy often played a role. Women who owned land, brewed herbal remedies, or simply lived without men attracted resentment. Independence was threatening, and the easiest way to destroy it was with a word: witch. Accusations overwhelmingly targeted women, especially those who defied gender norms. Midwives, healers, widows, and outspoken wives found themselves at the center of suspicion. Why? Because they held power outside male control. A midwife could influence life and death during childbirth. A healer knew remedies the church could not. A widow managed her own property, answering to no husband. The very qualities that gave these women agency made them dangerous in the eyes of society. To accuse them of witchcraft was to strip that power away, reducing them from respected figures to symbols of shame. Publicly humiliated, their reputations destroyed, they served as lessons to others. Do not step beyond the roles prescribed. Witchcraft accusations also carried political and economic weight. Land disputes, inheritance battles, and village rivalries found resolution in witch trials. A convicted witch often lost her property, which could then be seized by the church, the crown, or local officials. Trials became not only spectacles, but opportunities for profit. At times, entire waves of trials swept through regions, spurred less by demonic fear than by political instability. In Germany, economic hardship and religious wars fueled witch panics that claimed thousands of lives. Each accusation, each humiliation, reinforced the authority of those in power by reminding communities who held the right to define sin. What made witchcraft accusations particularly humiliating was their vagueness. Unlike theft or murder, witchcraft left no tangible evidence. Suspicion alone could condemn. Once accused, escape was nearly impossible. The process itself was designed to humiliate public questioning. Invasive searches, forced confessions. Accusations often began with whispers, a woman muttering to herself, a neighbor seeing her out late, a child's nightmare. These whispers grew into rumors into formal charges. The accused was dragged into court, stripped of her dignity before the community. Guilt was assumed, innocence nearly impossible to prove. The humiliation began long before the sentence. Books like the Malleus Maleficarum did more than justify accusations. They provided scripts for humiliation. They instructed judges to strip women, shave their bodies, and search for devil's marks. They taught interrogators to trap women with leading questions, to twist silence into guilt, to turn tears into evidence. The manuals made humiliation systematic, no longer random or improvised. It became ritualized, enforced across courts and countries. A woman in France, Germany, or England might face different laws, but the script of humiliation was eerily similar. Witchcraft accusations served a communal purpose. They were not only about the accused, but about the audience. Trials reinforced social order by reminding everyone of the boundaries. Women saw what happened when independence was mistaken for defiance. Men saw the power of their laws and their gods reaffirmed. The humiliation of one woman became the safety of the community. Her suffering reassured the crowd that evil had been named, controlled, and punished. It turned fear into theater, with humiliation as the central act. But accusations were only the beginning. Once branded a witch, the humiliation deepened through ordeals. Tests so absurd, so degrading, they revealed the true purpose was never justice. Whether floating in rivers, being stripped and shaved, or pricked with needles, women endured trials designed to prove guilt before the verdict was even written. These ordeals transformed humiliation into spectacle, ensuring the crowd's thirst for certainty was quenched, even if truth was never found. Accusation was only the beginning. Once a woman was called a witch, she entered a world where humiliation was disguised as justice. The courtroom was not built to discover truth, it was built to confirm suspicion. To achieve that, medieval Europe devised a series of tests, each more degrading than the last. These ordeals did not seek evidence, they sought spectacle, confession, and fear. Imagine a woman bound tightly with rope, her arms pressed against her chest, her skirts tied at her ankles. Villagers gather along the banks of a river, waiting for proof of her guilt. A priest raises his hand, declares a prayer, and she is cast into the water. If she floats, the water has rejected her, proof of witchcraft. If she sinks, she is innocent, but likely drowned before anyone can save her. This swimming of witches was not a search for truth, but a performance. The sight of a bound woman struggling in cold water satisfied both curiosity and cruelty. Even survival was no salvation. A woman who floated was dragged back to shore, coughing and sputtering, only to face execution. Innocence came at the cost of life, guilt at the cost of dignity. Either way, humiliation was certain. Not all ordeals were public. Some took place in private chambers with officials, doctors, or self-proclaimed witch-finders performing the humiliation. One of the most degrading was the search for the devil's mark. It was believed that witches bore hidden marks, spots where Satan had touched them during their pact. To find these, women were stripped naked, shaved from head to toe, and subjected to invasive inspection. Neighbors, magistrates, and strangers stared at their exposed bodies, searching for moles, scars, or blemishes. Anything unusual, a birthmark, a freckle, even a skin tag, could be declared the devil's signature. But the humiliation did not end with exposure. If no mark was found, witch-finders used sharp needles to prick the flesh. They claimed witches would not bleed or feel pain at certain points. So the accused were jabbed repeatedly, sometimes with retractable needles designed to fake results. Every wince was seen as guilt. Every silence was twisted into proof. Some trials relied on fire, framing suffering as divine judgment. A woman might be forced to carry red-hot iron for several steps. If her wounds healed cleanly after a set number of days, she was innocent. If they festered, she was guilty. Others required walking barefoot across burning coals or holding her hand over flames. The pain was immediate, the scars lasting, but the humiliation was worse. These ordeals were often conducted in front of entire villages, ensuring that her agony became a shared memory, a cautionary tale for every watching woman. Another test exploited absurdity itself. In some towns, accused witches were weighed against the Bible. If a woman was lighter, she was suspected of witchcraft. The logic: witches defied natural law, floating unnaturally, just as they floated in rivers. Public scales were set in marketplaces, with villagers jeering as the accused climbed onto the balance. No outcome brought dignity. To be weighed like grain, livestock, or coin was itself a statement that the woman was property, an object to be measured, mocked, and condemned. Beyond physical ordeals, humiliation also came through interrogation. Judges demanded confessions, often extracted under torture. But even without pain, the psychological pressure was immense. Women were told to name accomplices, to describe Sabbaths with the devil, to recount sexual liaisons with demons. The questions themselves were humiliating, forcing women to speak words that destroyed their reputations. If they resisted, silence was guilt. If they complied, they implicated themselves and others. Mothers accused daughters, friends betrayed friends, each confession feeding the cycle of fear. Perhaps the most symbolic humiliation was the stripping of clothing. Before many trials, women were forced to stand naked, their hair shaved away. Officials claimed it prevented them from hiding charms or spells. In truth, it stripped them of dignity, exposing their vulnerability to the crowd. Hair, long associated with femininity and power, was taken as a precaution against magic. But the act was not only practical, it was ritualistic. To shave a woman's head was to erase her identity, to mark her publicly as fallen, polluted, and outside the protection of society. These ordeals worked because they were not only physical but psychological. They broke women before verdicts were even delivered, to float, to bleed, to burn, to be weighed. Each ritual reminded both accused and audience that innocence was impossible. The humiliation was twofold. The woman endured shame, and the community was reminded of its power. Villagers left reassured that evil had been named and controlled, their fears temporarily quieted. The spectacle mattered more than truth. Though methods varied across regions, the themes were consistent. In England, Matthew Hopkins, the notorious witch-finder general, made pricking and watching women go sleepless for days his specialties. In Germany, elaborate ordeals of fire and branding humiliated accused women before execution. In France and Italy, shaving and public parades preceded torture. Everywhere, humiliation was not a byproduct, it was the point. By shaming women publicly, authorities reinforced order, ensuring obedience through fear. What stands out most is how absurd these ordeals were. Water that rejects or drowns, needles that pierce or retract, coals that burn or scar. None of it proved witchcraft, yet entire communities believed. The absurdity itself was powerful because it showed how far authority could bend reality. The trials revealed not the truth of witchcraft, but the truth of fear. Societies preferred impossible logic to uncertainty, and by accepting that logic, they justified cruelty. But humiliation did not end with ordeals. If the tests confirmed suspicion, the accused faced public trials staged like performances. Courtrooms became theaters, judges became directors, and villagers became an eager audience. The woman was no longer a neighbor, she was a witch on display, and the humiliation that began in secret chambers now exploded onto public stages, turning pain into entertainment for all. The ordeal was only the beginning. Once the tests branded a woman a witch, humiliation moved from rivers and chambers to the heart of the village, the trial itself. These trials were not hidden proceedings whispered behind closed doors. They were staged like theater, designed to entertain, terrify, and instruct. Every laugh, every gasp, every whispered prayer in the courtroom reinforced the same lesson. Obedience was safety, defiance was humiliation. Picture a medieval courtroom, wooden benches packed with villagers, torches flickering against stone walls, a judge in robes presiding like a master of ceremonies. At the center, a woman stands disheveled, stripped of dignity, trembling under the weight of hundreds of eyes. Her fate has already been decided, but the performance must be completed. Witnesses are called, recounting dreams, suspicions, and gossip as though they were facts. A cow's sickness, a child's nightmare, a sudden storm, all retold as evidence of her pact with the devil. The crowd leans in, savoring each accusation like a chapter in a story they already know the ending to. The trial is not a search for truth. It is entertainment, ritualized humiliation cloaked in law. What passed for interrogation was often little more than psychological warfare. Judges peppered the accused with questions designed to trap them, demanding they describe secret meetings with Satan, sexual encounters with demons, or rituals of blood and fire. Silence was guilt. Tears were guilt. A denial was twisted into proof of deception. The humiliation lay not only in the accusations but in the details demanded. Women were forced to speak aloud words that stained them, confessing to crimes invented by their accusers. To describe sex with a demon in front of neighbors, priests, and children was not merely degrading, it was a destruction of identity. Even if acquitted, such words clung to them like scars. One of the cruelest aspects of trials was the demand that accused women name accomplices. Under pressure, women pointed to friends, neighbors, even family, hoping to save themselves. The humiliation of turning against loved ones shattered trust within communities. This tactic ensured that trials spread like contagion. One accusation created 3 more, and each new confession fed the system. Women were humiliated not only by what was done to them, but by what they were forced to do to others. To stand in court and accuse your own daughter, sister, or friend was humiliation magnified. For villagers, attending trials was not only entertainment, it was reassurance. In a world of famine and plague, fear demanded an outlet. The spectacle of a witch trial allowed communities to believe they had identified and contained evil. The crowd's participation was vital. Their gasps, their jeers, their murmurs of prayer transformed the trial into collective theater. The The humiliation of the accused was magnified by the sheer number of eyes watching, judging, condemning. Her downfall became a lesson rehearsed before every woman present. Stay silent, obey, conform. Judges and priests embraced the role of performers. Their booming voices, elaborate robes, and dramatic readings of accusations elevated them to figures of awe. They framed the trial as a battle between good and evil, casting themselves as defenders of God and order. This theatricality reinforced the humiliation of the accused. Against the grandeur of robes and crosses, the woman's bare feet, shorn hair, and trembling voice marked her as weak, guilty, and unworthy. The contrast was intentional, designed to strip her of any remaining dignity. Unlike modern courts, evidence in witch trials was often little more than rumor. A neighbor might testify that the accused muttered to herself at night, or that milk curdled after she visited. Dreams were treated as proof. Children's words were recorded as gospel. For the accused, this was the deepest humiliation, to know that her fate was decided not by actions but by whispers. She was reduced to caricature, her identity remade by gossip. Even before sentencing, she was already condemned in the eyes of her community. When confessions were extracted, whether through torture, threats, or relentless questioning, they were read aloud to the crowd. These confessions, often fabricated under duress, became public entertainment. The more lurid the detail, the more satisfying the performance. A woman describing midnight feasts with Satan, orgies with demons, or flying through the night on broomsticks fed the crowd's appetite for horror. The humiliation was complete, not only forced to confess, but to confess in ways that turned her into the monstrous figure villagers feared. Trials also humiliated by weaponizing women against each other. Mothers testified against daughters, neighbors against neighbors. Sometimes women were coerced into serving as witnesses, asked to describe how another woman tempted them into sin. This manipulation fractured bonds, leaving women isolated and vulnerable. The humiliation of being accused was mirrored by the humiliation of being forced to accuse. In both roles, women were stripped of dignity, transformed into tools of the system. Every trial ended with the same unspoken message: this could be you. By humiliating one woman publicly, the authorities controlled many others privately. The performance was not only about the accused, it was about shaping behavior in the entire community. Girls grew up hearing stories of women paraded in court. Mothers whispered warnings about gossip and independence. The memory of humiliation became inherited, a silent guide shaping generations. In Germany, trials became mass spectacles, with entire towns attending interrogations. In Scotland, women were displayed in bridals before being questioned. In France, public humiliations preceded torture. Each culture adapted trials to local traditions, but the purpose was always the same: humiliation as control. The scale varied, but the performance remained constant. Whether a single woman before a village or dozens accused in mass trials, the theatre of humiliation united communities through fear. Yet trials were not the end, they were preludes. Once humiliation in the courtroom was complete, humiliation continued in punishment. Women were paraded in stocks, branded, flogged, and executed in spectacles that drew even larger crowds. The trial was rehearsal, the punishment was the final act. The trial humiliated, but the sentence destroyed. Once declared guilty of witchcraft, a woman's life was no longer her own. What followed was not only death, but ritualized humiliation designed to strip her dignity before her body was erased. Punishment was not meant to be swift or merciful. It was meant to be a spectacle, an event that seared fear into memory. Punishment often began with parades. The condemned was dragged through the streets, bound in ropes or chains, her body displayed for ridicule. Iron collars dug into her neck, Heavy carts rattled beneath her feet, and jeering crowds spat insults as she passed. Some wore placards naming their supposed crimes: witch, heretic, whore. Others were forced to carry symbols of shame, brooms, cauldrons, or dolls to mock the accusations against them. Hair was shaved, dresses torn, faces smeared with ash or filth. This parade was not transport, it was theatre. The humiliation was the point, ensuring that her reputation died long before her body did. Before execution, some women were locked in stocks or pillories. Forced to kneel or stand with heads and hands trapped in wood, they were left exposed to public abuse. Children pelted them with rotten food. Men hurled insults, mocking their supposed pacts with demons. The body became an object, stripped of humanity, reduced to a prop in a performance of shame. Hours turned to days. The humiliation of confinement deepened as their bodies ached, their dignity eroded under constant ridicule. The punishment was not death, but the slow erosion of self. Some convicted witches bore marks long before execution, hot irons pressed against skin, leaving permanent scars that declared guilt. Branding was both punishment and proof, a visible sign that humiliated even in death. Branded women were sometimes paraded once more, their scars displayed as warnings. To mark flesh was to erase identity, reducing a woman to a symbol of sin. Her body carried the message, "This is what happens when you defy." The most infamous punishment was burning. Fire was framed as purification, a cleansing flame to rid the soul of sin. But to the condemned, it was agony prolonged. Women were tied to stakes, ropes, cutting into their flesh. Bundles of wood were piled high, and the crowd gathered eagerly, the execution as much entertainment as judgment. Priests prayed, judges declared sentences, and torches were set to kindling. Flames licked at skirts, smoke choked lungs, and screams pierced the air until voices fell silent. Yet even in death, humiliation remained. Spectators laughed, mocked, and cheered. For them, the execution was not tragedy but reassurance. They saw evil consumed and order preserved. Not all witches burned. Some were hanged, their bodies swinging in marketplaces, reminders of law and punishment. Strangulation often preceded burning, a small mercy granted to the condemned. But mercy did not erase humiliation. The crowd still jeered, the body still became a spectacle. Before executions, women were often stripped and shaved, their hair symbols of femininity and power taken as trophies. This ritual dehumanized, reducing them to objects. Even after death, humiliation continued. Ashes were scattered, names cursed, families shamed. Some communities refused burial in consecrated ground, leaving women unremembered, erased from sacred spaces. Punishments for witches targeted femininity. Breasts were cut, wombs mocked, sexuality twisted into crime. Unlike thieves or murderers, witches were punished not only for deeds, but for being women who transgressed. Their humiliation was gendered, attacking the very symbols of motherhood, fertility, and voice. Punishments drew massive crowds, markets closed, villagers gathered, children lifted onto shoulders to see better. These were not private executions, they were communal rituals. The crowd's presence magnified humiliation, ensuring that every gasp and laugh reinforced the lesson. This could be you. Punishments did not end witch trials, they fueled them. Each execution created new rumors, new suspicions, new accusations. The humiliation of one woman served as fuel for the humiliation of many more. But punishment was not only physical, it was also narrative. Stories spread, pamphlets exaggerated, and myths grew. Some humiliations were real, others invented, but all served the same purpose: to convince societies that witches deserved their fate. And so humiliation expanded beyond the courtroom and the stake into legends that haunted centuries. Not every humiliation suffered by accused witches happened in reality. Many were imagined, exaggerated, or fabricated after the fact. Myths and legends spread faster than facts, shaping how entire societies viewed women accused of sorcery. These stories magnified fear, reinforced control, and deepened humiliation, ensuring witches lived on as symbols of shame long after their bodies turned to ash. One of the most enduring myths was the Witch Sabbath, a supposed nocturnal gathering where women flew through the night, feasted with demons, and pledged loyalty to Satan. In reality, no court records confirm such gatherings, yet the image became widespread, painted in lurid detail by demonologists and artists. For the accused, the myth itself was humiliating. Trials often forced women to confess to attending Sabbaths, describing acts they never experienced, orgies with beasts, dances around fires, or even eating the flesh of infants. The humiliation was not only public, it was spiritual, branding women as enemies of God through stories others had invented. Another legend told of witches flying on broomsticks, their hair wild, their bodies silhouetted against the moon. While rooted in herbal practices, women did sometimes use staffs coated with hallucinogenic ointments. The imagery was twisted into something grotesque. To confess to flight was to confess to impossible magic. Yet humiliation came in the demand itself. Judges asked women to describe how they mounted their brooms, how they flew across skies. The absurdity mocked them, turning their trial into spectacle and their confessions into entertainment. Perhaps the most humiliating myths were those that sexualized witches. Manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum claimed witches engaged in intercourse with demons, bore monstrous offspring, or used men's severed genitals as charms. These stories reflected less about women and more about male fears of female sexuality. By framing witches as insatiable, perverse, and unholy, society shamed women for desire itself. In trials, women were forced to describe these supposed encounters in graphic detail, their humiliation amplified by the very language they were compelled to speak. Central to witchcraft trials was the idea of a pact with Satan. Women were accused of signing contracts in blood, kissing the devil, or renouncing Christ. Often these accusations were entirely fabricated, yet confessions were forced under torture. The myth ensured humiliation on two fronts. First, women were branded traitors not just to society but to God. Second, their supposed betrayal became gossip and folklore, retold for generations. Even after death, their names carried shame. Humiliation also spread through fabricated evidence. Officials displayed dolls, powders, or strange objects as proof of witchcraft, claiming they had been found in women's homes. In many cases, these items were planted or reinterpreted. A child's toy became a devil doll. A healing herb became a potion of death. These fabrications mocked women's daily lives, turning ordinary objects into tools of crime. The humiliation lay in knowing that even the simplest aspects of their existence could be twisted into guilt. With the rise of the printing press, witch myths spread widely. Pamphlets, woodcuts, and broadsides depicted women with horns, flying beasts, or monstrous children. These images exaggerated reality, ensuring witches were remembered not as neighbors but as grotesque caricatures. For the women accused, these images meant their humiliation outlived them. A single trial became legend, their names immortalized as examples of evil. Myths transformed their suffering into entertainment for strangers miles away. Some of the most humiliating stories were entirely invented. Tales of witches boiling children, poisoning wells, or summoning storms circulated without evidence. Communities believed them because they explained fear, not because they were true. Yet once recorded, these legends were treated as fact. Women were humiliated not only by what they endured, but by what they never did. Their identities were erased, replaced with monstrous myths. The power of these legends was not in accuracy but in effect. Myths frightened children into obedience, reinforced male authority, and justified harsh laws. They turned humiliation into a weapon of culture, ensuring women feared accusation even if they had done nothing. The legacy of these myths lingers. Even today, the image of the cackling, broom-riding witch survives, divorced from the real women who suffered. Their humiliation became cultural memory, repeated in stories, costumes, and caricatures. But myths did not end with medieval Europe. Their echoes shaped centuries of fear, from Salem to modern stereotypes. To understand the full humiliation of witches, we must explore not only the trials and punishments, but the legacies they left, scars on culture, law, and memory that endure even now. The flames have long since died, the courtrooms crumbled, and the torches extinguished. Yet the humiliation of accused witches did not vanish with the Middle Ages. It lingers, etched into culture, law, and memory. To understand the full weight of these trials, we must look beyond the immediate horrors to the legacy they left behind. Because humiliation was not only a punishment, it was a seed planted in history, one that still grows in shadows today. For centuries, entire communities carried the memory of witch trials as if they were moral lessons. Mothers warned daughters not to speak too boldly. Wives lowered their gazes, fearing that independence could draw suspicion. The humiliation of one woman became the silent instruction for many others. This collective memory was powerful. It taught that shame was more dangerous than death. A woman's voice, her body, her choices, any could be weaponized against her. Humiliation became a cultural inheritance, whispered across generations as a warning: survive by silence. Perhaps the clearest echo of Europe's witch trials came in 17th century Salem, Massachusetts. There too, humiliation was wielded as power. Young girls pointed trembling fingers, neighbors accused neighbors, and women stood in court forced to deny the impossible. The parallels were striking. Accused women were stripped, searched for devil's marks, and interrogated in front of their communities. Confessions were extracted, not to find truth, but to fuel hysteria. The humiliation was the same, public shaming as proof of guilt. Salem revealed how the legacy of Europe's witch hunts had crossed oceans, infecting new worlds with old fears. The humiliation of witches carried a symbolic weight that extended far beyond individual trials. Women accused of witchcraft became symbols, warnings etched into cultural imagination. They represented the dangers of independence, knowledge, or sexuality expressed outside male control. This symbolism still resonates. Even today, witch remains a slur, hurled at women who challenge authority. From medieval courts to modern politics, the word carries humiliation with it, transforming powerful women into figures of suspicion. Cultural memory preserved humiliation not only through history, but through myth. The cackling hag, the broomstick, the devil's consort, these caricatures endured in folklore, literature, and art. Children's stories turned witches into villains. Carnival masks mocked their features. Halloween costumes commercialized their suffering. In each retelling, the real women disappeared. Their humiliation was recycled into entertainment. The suffering of flesh and blood neighbors became a cultural joke, repeated endlessly until myth replaced memory. The witch trials revealed something deeper than superstition, the use of humiliation as psychological control. By publicly shaming women, societies reinforced order without constant violence. A single execution in flames resonated louder than 1,000 laws. That legacy persisted. In later centuries, women who challenged norms, whether through activism, sexuality, or intellect, faced humiliation instead of stakes. Public shaming became the modern stake, whether in newspapers, pulpits, or gossip. The method changed, but the principle endured. Humiliate one, control many. History should have taught societies the dangers of mass hysteria and ritualized humiliation. Yet echoes of witch trials appear in every era. From accusations of heresy to modern moral panics, groups have used humiliation to mark outsiders, enforce conformity, and control women. Consider the scarlet letter branded on women accused of adultery in Puritan New England. Consider public shaming rituals in Victorian prisons. Consider, even now, how online mobs humiliate women for their voices, choices, or appearance. Each is a descendant of the same legacy: humiliation as justice. At their core, witch trials revealed how humiliation served institutions. The church used trials to reinforce spiritual authority. States used them to display political strength. Communities used them to channel fear. The humiliation of accused witches was not random cruelty, it was organized, institutionalized, and systematized. And in that organization lies the lesson: humiliation is not merely individual suffering, it is a political tool. In recent decades, feminists have sought to reclaim the figure of the witch. No longer a symbol of shame, she is reframed as a symbol of resistance. Books, films, and movements celebrate witches as women who refused silence, who embodied knowledge, power, and independence. And this reclamation flips the narrative. What once was humiliation becomes defiance. What once was shame becomes pride. Yet even as witches are reclaimed, the history of their humiliation must not be forgotten. The power of that humiliation explains why reclamation is necessary. Some might argue that witch trials are distant relics, irrelevant today, but forgetting them carries danger. The same mechanisms of humiliation, public shaming, fabricated evidence, absurd logic reappear in new guises. To forget the humiliation of witches is to risk repeating it. When societies forget, myths creep in. Just as the Iron Maiden was fabricated to thrill museum visitors, the reality of witch trials is often softened into folklore. The danger lies in romanticizing horror, in reducing humiliation to entertainment without remembering its victims. What then can we learn? The trials reveal that humiliation is more powerful than violence because it outlives the body. Death ends suffering. Humiliation echoes carried in memory, gossip, and story. The lesson is not only about the past, it is about vigilance. Whenever humiliation is used as punishment, whether in courts, media, or online, the ghost of witch trials stirs. The structures may differ, but the principle is the same: control through shame. To honor the women humiliated as witches, we must resist repeating the system that destroyed them. That means questioning narratives designed to shame, rejecting myths that demonize, and remembering that justice must never be spectacle. The legacy of witch trials is heavy. It is ash, scar, and silence. But it is also lesson. By understanding how humiliation shaped history, we arm ourselves against its return. Imagine again the medieval square. The torches, the crowd, the woman bound in ropes. Her humiliation was meant to silence her forever. Yet centuries later, we speak her story. Her voice, though forced into silence, still echoes. The legacy of humiliation is not only pain, it is also memory. And in remembering, we ensure that humiliation is exposed for what it was, not justice, but theater. Not truth, but control. Not history to repeat, but history to resist.